Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And today we are going to be reading Stand Tall Little Girl by Hope Virgo. And we will say this now, Becky has a new addition to the family. His name is Toby. So if you hear any rustling or jingling about, that would be him running around. He is a 5-month-old Schnauzer cross
Shih Tzu.
He is very cute. I'm going to steal him when she's not looking. So I just thought I'd let you know. So not only do we have Bertie April to deal with, we also now have Toby. And Becky's also dog sitting, so we also have Farah and Barley. So we have a house full.
Yeah, there's 5 animals and us 2. We're outnumbered.
We are by the animals. The animals are taking over the world.
But he's very cute and we welcome him.
And if you haven't looked on Twitter, there are some photos up on Twitter of him looking absolutely adorable and stealable.
Okay, so let's go through the review. So Goodreads reviews this book at 3.95 stars with 21 ratings and 4 reviews. And Amazon is a 4.9 with 85 ratings.
So the book blurb, what does that say?
So it says, I know how anorexia makes you feel. You think she is your friend. You think she can solve everything and make you feel amazing. But she will destroy you and everything around you, piece by piece. Hope Virgo. For 4 years, Hope managed to keep it hidden, keeping dark secrets from friends and family. But then on the 17th of November 2007, Hope's world changed forever. She was admitted to a mental health hospital. Her skin is yellowing, her heart was failing, she was barely recognisable. Forced to leave her family and friends, the hospital became her home. Over the next year, at her lowest ebb, Hope faced the biggest challenge of her life. She has to find the courage to beat her anorexia. In Stand Tall Little Girl, Hope shares her harrowing yet truly inspiring journey. And I gave this 4 stars.
And so did I.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one we've agreed on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book. I thought it was really well written. It's a short read.
Yes, it was pretty quick, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I found the subject matter quite hard going in some places. I don't know about you. And I know that this may have been triggering to you because you have suffered with anorexia and still to this day have some issues associated with food and eating.
Yeah, so I had anorexia through my childhood. I can't even tell you when it started.
Or why?
Why is definitely because of my overbearing mother, and who is also overweight. She is morbidly obese. She was the ruler of the roost and ruler of me, and I didn't want to be her. So my way of not being her was to not be obese. So therefore I went the extreme opposite.
And stopped eating.
Yeah. But it was also about control, because she was controlling, she was very demanding, and so it gave me something to control in the house. So it was able for me to do what we see Hope doing. So I will share my experiences as we go through, but it did mean that as I was reading it, I could really relate to a lot of the stuff Hope was saying.
Yeah, I think I could too, because I've kind of gone through periods of restricting my eating but then binging afterwards.
Yeah.
So even though it would be classified as binge eating for me, I did definitely recognise some of the traits that you see in Hope. The ability to add up all the calories on a plate and those kind of things. And to be fair, I also, at university, I studied nutrition and dietetics. And to be honest, I probably in some way shouldn't have, because it just made me even more paranoid about food and eating and everything else.
There's so much advice that's conflicting about what is good for you, what is bad for you, what you should have. And I think, I try and go with now everything in proportion and just stick to that. And so I allow myself to have some naughties, but also have the good stuff and try and have more of the good stuff.
Yeah, because we haven't eaten coconut cake today. No, don't tell anyone.
But we've got chicken salad for lunch.
We do.
So it's balancing it out.
Exactly. So we're not 100% naughty all the time. Yeah, and I'd like to say something about the conflicting information out there. What you've got to remember is that nutrition is a science like all of the other sciences, and things change as we start to learn new things. And I think that's probably something that the public find extremely difficult to get to grips with. Yeah. So, for example, with eggs, there was a time when they were told, don't eat eggs because they're bad for your cholesterol.
Yeah.
However, later research has identified that the cholesterol within eggs doesn't actually increase your serum cholesterol in your blood. So you've got this...
They now talk about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, don't they?
Exactly. So as we get more and more knowledge, the guidelines that you see in terms of nutrition do change. And I think that's probably the most difficult part. Also, you've got the issues with fad diets that are like, you mustn't eat carbs, or you mustn't eat fats, or you should do the Atkins, or you should do the cabbage soup diet and all of those kind of things. And I think that's probably also another thing, because you read that these things do work. And of course they work because you're reducing the amount of calories you consume in a day, but it's not sustainable. And that's what we're looking for. When people are given nutritional information, it is about ensuring that you can sustain that. And as you said, eating everything in proportion is the best way to go. I've had people, particularly my stepmom, who is morbidly obese. She has had a couple of heart attacks and she's about to go through gastric bypass surgery to reduce her weight, because to be fair, if she even changed her diet now, it wouldn't do any kind of help for her at this point. And they have again suggested that she has a healthy, balanced diet, because that's the way people in the health profession are going. It's not a case of giving you this prescriptive diet that you then need to stick to and then break.
So I think it's sometimes where newspapers such as like the Daily Mail blow things out of proportion and say things like bacon will give you cancer.
To be fair, everything gives you cancer. Breathing can cause cancer. So, and unfortunately, this is going to sound very judgmental, but you have people that say that they know about a healthy diet and a healthy balanced diet. And obviously there's all those health messages out there, but yet when it comes to putting that into practice, they fail miserably.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, we teach it in schools over and over again, and the kids say, we've had enough of it. But at the same time, they don't actually act on the information. Advice. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, that's just a little bugbear of mine. So I'm just going to be a little cranky by that.
Okay, so in the book, Hope starts by talking about her anorexia as her best friend, which I found really interesting.
And I think very apt. I mean, I call my depression and anxiety Bob, and seeing that anorexia as that external thing to her can kind of help her to really fight it, because she's not fighting herself, she is fighting anorexia when she gets to that point. But to begin with, anorexia is her best friend, because she is always there for her. She is there to help her cope with her life.
Yeah, she is. She's there to help. She's there to actually get her to get what she wants, which is to be this skinny idea. But what Hope doesn't realise at the time is that what she sees when she looks in the mirror isn't what she actually does look like.
So a touch of body dysmorphia.
Yeah, and I definitely think I could relate to that, because I always thought I was fat, and now I look back at pictures and you can see my bones, and it wasn't what I thought it was, and I can start to see that now. I still have trouble though knowing what I look like in the mirror, and have to go on clothing size, but that's an issue because clothing size changes so much in so many places, so it's really difficult to even use that. So I do find it very difficult to kind of know what I look like.
And also with those fitting rooms that have the sneaky elongating mirrors that you can never quite tell, particularly when you have that age-old question of, does my bum look big in this? And these mirrors are tending to try and flatter you.
Yeah, definitely. It's just all very difficult when you also can't see it for yourself. So
I can't see it either. So no matter how much weight I lose, I always feel like I'm bigger than what I am. And I've lost quite a bit now, and I still think I'm huge.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's just going to be something that's always with me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of see myself as my mother. So when I look in the mirror, I see myself as like morbidly obese.
Which you're not, by the way.
Thank you.
So we see with Hope from her description in the book that really her anorexia started as a way to cope with her home life. So she has a busy, chaotic home life, though. So there's 5 children in her family, plus her parents. And her parents didn't necessarily have the best relationship at this time. So you see the relationship between her parents starting to break down, and there's an increase in arguments and things. So you can see why this would be a good way and a good sense of control, because she can't necessarily control anything else in her life at this point.
And I think that is a big factor when people talk about anorexia, that a lot of it is to do with control, and about food is much easier to control than anything else. So you can say no, you can say I don't like this, and things like that are able to then change things. I know that I started off by making my parents make different meals for me because I didn't like that and I didn't like this, and so they had to like kind of adjust things, and so I was kind of, the things I would eat was getting smaller and smaller.
There's this again a question of whether her parents have noticed and stuff, but I mean, I don't think it's necessarily easy to figure out when someone is being, I don't know, it's going to sound judgmental, but there is this ability for someone with anorexia to manipulate those around them and get them to see what they want them to see. And you get to see that with the ingenious ways she comes up with being able to hide it from her family. And if you are in a busy household and you are a mother and a father and you have 4 other children to look after, you're not necessarily going to notice when one starts to skip things. And she talks about how she would sneak it into her pockets and into plant pots and all of these kind of ways to stop herself from being caught when she's not eating.
Yeah, and even just making sure you make the cereal in the morning, you put it in the bowl, you put the milk in, you then, tip it away, and then you put the bowl in the sink, and it looks like you've had a meal. It looks like you've eaten. I mean, I know I used to do that. And we lived in a busy household, so it was easy to be able to say I'd eaten because no one was there to notice.
And again, with Hope, it starts off small, so she starts to skip the odd meal here and there, and then she starts to, I don't know, there's some kind of reward associated with the fact that she's been able to get away with missing some food. And as a result of that, it starts to then perpetuate, so she starts to increase it. So she's like, well, if I've managed to do that, and she talks about how it's her anorexia whispering to her, going, well, you've done this and you've achieved this. What about trying this instead?
It taps into her competitive nature and gives her sort of goals and targets. Yeah. And once she's done it, it sort of rewards her with being skinnier.
Yeah, and then you go, oh, well, you can get away with this, so let's do this. And you see that Hope is very much into her exercise and her running and all of those kind of things. But it gets to the point where she becomes so unwell that she ends up in hospital.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying that she is almost going to die from this. And the rates of people dying of anorexia, I think, aren't as published as they should be. People are dying every day because their hearts, their major organs can't deal with the lack of energy that they're being given. You start to lose muscle mass around your major organs when you're doing this, and her skin starts to yellow as if her
liver's shutting down, her kidneys start to shut down, and it's pretty awful, really.
Yeah, and even she talks about how after she is recovering, she hears about people who she was in hospital with who have died of this because it isn't something that it isn't a simple thing, and it is actually much more complex. And I wouldn't say it's like a self-inflicted death, but at the same time, it's something telling you to do it, and you can't see where you're going to end up.
And I think the most important thing here for people to understand is that it isn't rational.
No,
this whole process is not something that you go, well, actually, I can start to see that what I'm doing is hurting myself. It's a compulsion to stop eating and to control that as part of it.
And Hope actually starts to feel a lot of guilt around this as well. She starts to feel that she's actually around her family feeling a lot of guilt because when she does come out of hospital, the food that she's eating has to be very specific and at specific times, and it has to be prepared in a certain way, and she has to watch just in case someone slips something in that they shouldn't, and all these things mean that she is actually controlling the people around her. But at the same time, it's helping her to get well because then she, starts off by, you can drink this glass of milk.
And just a few statistics associating with eating disorders. Between the 600,000 and 725,000 people in the UK are affected by an eating disorder at any one time. Eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa are serious mental health conditions. And I'm going to underline serious in the air. It looks really weird.
But it is, because you can die from this, and that is serious.
And I tried to find some statistics on how many people would be classified as their death as a result of an eating disorder, and I couldn't necessarily find anything for the UK, but for the US, every 62 minutes, at least one person dies as a direct result of an eating disorder.
So that's basically 1 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think 1 an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
It's a lot of people.
It is, and probably a lot more than people realise, because also there is a whole stigma around eating disorders that people think it's easy to get over. They think that, you know, you should just be able to snap out of it. You just eat.
Yeah. And also 1 in 5 anorexia deaths is associated with suicide. So they take their own lives as a result of their anorexia, which is heartbreaking. I find that extremely difficult as a statistic to take home with me.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about how easy it is for an individual with anorexia or any eating disorder to be able to mask the symptoms. I mean, Hope talks about wearing baggy jumpers and hiding the fact that she is also using purging as a way to reduce her weight, and how she hides food from her parents, and the fact that she is still kind of going through the motions of eating but isn't actually eating.
Yeah.
If you were a parent, it must be extremely difficult because you have other children to think about, you have all these other responsibilities, and how bad must you feel as a parent to find out that your child is suffering from an eating disorder and you haven't noticed?
Yeah, and it is actually quite interesting in this book because there are segments that the mum has written, Hope's mum, and I found those really interesting to see how she was saying how she wants to help, but there was such this helplessness because actually you can't help someone unless they want help themselves. And until Hope was ready to actually take that help and accept what was going on.
I question whether she was actually ready at the point she ends up in hospital. It's a case of she ends up in hospital because her BMI has dropped so low that there is a risk of her heart failing.
Yeah. I think then by showing her, by her getting her to eat and things like that. Although I don't think she
doesn't in the first instance. I think it takes a long time for her to come around to the realisation that actually she might have died from the condition.
I think, after she's actually probably out of hospital and everything. So, but I do find it is hard to know, when do you take your kid to the hospital for this? You know, at what point? Because as a layman, you don't know what is going on inside. And so it is, I think, very difficult for a parent to know, you know, exactly when do you take your kid? Is it when they've skipped a couple of meals, a week of meals? And
that's even if you know at that point.
Yeah. You know, and people kept putting it down to, I've got a very tall dad. He is 6'4".
But you're mini.
And I am mini, and my mum is very short. She's only 5 foot. And so when I was skinny, people put it down to, oh, you take after your dad. So people thought that I was just skinny but short. So short like mum, but skinny like dad. And so it was always put down to that. And so no one really noticed because I was just skinny because that's what my dad was. And I think that is also the thing, that we see skinny as healthy. We see skinny as the optimal thing to be. Yeah. And I think that is a real problem because it means that parents, everyone looking, thinks actually they are healthy. They're doing the right thing. And I think then it takes longer. And I think for some of the stories that Hope talks about of other people at the hospital, it does seem to get to a very extreme point before help is sought.
But I think that also might be the nature of being sneaky about eating and so on. So there is that issue. I mean, I've seen an 11-year-old with anorexia in hospital. So she'd been hospitalised and she was being fed through a tube. So she was having this feed overnight. But what she did to get away with being able to exercise was she paid another child on the ward to sit in her bed because she was getting regularly checked on. A bit like Hope when she is talking about how she desperately wants to exercise, but when she's in the hospital, she's told she can't because it is just too much for her system to handle. But she paid another child on the ward to sit in her bed so it looked like she was still in there while she went to the playroom and cycled around the playroom on a little tricycle.
Wow.
And that's just that's probably the nature of the condition, though, is that you need to exercise. There's that drive to exercise.
We're told it, you know, exercising is good for you. You need to do it regularly. You need to be healthy. You need to exercise at least 30 minutes every day. And especially children, we put them through PE, we put them through extracurricular activities, wanting them to be healthy. But at what point does it become obsessive?
Yeah, and too much, and you need to seek help.
Yeah.
And I really thought that the interjections from Hope's mum were really good, because it showed that it's not good that she felt guilty, but it showed that she did feel guilty about the situation because she hadn't noticed. But I think discussing that guilt is pretty important, because how do you then handle that, again, as a parent, that guilt that you haven't noticed?
Well, what I think is good is, rather than having guilt and then covering it up, they have guilt and they seek help, which I think is the important step. And I think that's what the important message from this is that actually, if you feel guilty, some families would cover this up.
Mm.
And I know my mother said to me that she wouldn't take me to the doctors as long as I reached a certain weight and I didn't go below it. That weight was below the BMI that's recommended, but it's what we agreed. And I still messed around. I still went below it, but she never took me to the hospital.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know how close I was to being, extremely seriously ill like Hope was. I do know I've fainted and blacked out at college a few times, and I don't remember certain incidents. But then that also scared me enough to actually start asking for help from people around me, and that was my friends more than anyone.
But I also think that Hope's mum talking about it would be helpful for other parents that are going through the same issue, is that they're probably going to be feeling guilty as well. And you kind of go, well, I'm not the only one, because there is someone out there that is saying the same thing, that they felt guilty for not noticing.
But I also think that all parents who have any kind of sickness in their child, so, a leukemia diagnosis or any kind of diagnosis with any illness, is going to feel guilt. And I do think that we have to recognise that, this is a mental health issue. This is as if she'd been diagnosed with diabetes or cancer. This is serious, and parents have no control over that, as much as they don't have any control over if their kid gets cancer. And I think it's important to recognise that and say to parents, it is understandable that you don't see this at times, and you have no control over whether someone gets anorexia or not.
Or any other eating disorder for that matter.
And I've even spoken to my mum about how she doesn't realise she's the reason that I had anorexia. And I don't have the heart to tell her, because at the same time as she is the reason I developed it, she's not really the reason. It's a mental health issue. It is,
there are lots of reasons.
And she could have been completely different, and something else might have triggered it. So I don't want to put the blame on her. But I do feel that Hope's parents do feel that guilt for, have they caused this to happen? Have they triggered this in their child?
And then they also have this guilt, again, associated with the fact that they are unable to help Hope during this time. And again, the way that you need to handle anorexia is probably to seek help from a healthcare professional.
Definitely.
Because there are things that you just aren't going to be able to do.
There's also a range of tests they need to run to see how your body is working, what is failing, what is not working properly, what needs help. Because I'm sure that things like my IBS, I think, are triggered by having that and not digesting properly through my teenage years. And I think, there's no medical diagnosis for that. I've not sought medical, expertise as to whether that's the case, but
she's diagnosing by Google. No, I'm joking.
Sorry, secret psych.
She's gonna come and beat you now. I can feel it.
But I do think that it can cause a hell of a lot of other health issues. It can cause heart murmurs, heart problems. It can cause lung issues. It can cause liver, kidneys, all these major things that you need to stay alive. So it is really important to seek medical help so that they can assess not just how this mental health issue is affecting and how the anorexia is proceeding, but also they can actually check the rest of the body. And I think that is really important.
The other thing to mention at this point, force feeding, particularly in the home without medical supervision, is not the way to go. Just putting that out there. And I know that you've had experience with your parents trying to force feed you certain foods.
Yeah.
And
which I can still not eat. I cannot eat mashed potato because they force fed it to me when I wasn't eating. And I just remember being force-fed it and then being sick afterwards because, you know, that's what ends up happening because your body rejects it because your mind's rejecting it. And no one wants to be forced to do anything, and it's just not the healthy way of dealing with it. So even to this day, I've tried as a grown-up to sit there and go, you know, there's no reason why I shouldn't like this because it's potato. Pretty much tastes like nothing, or cream or cheese or whatever you put with it. Mashed potato doesn't really taste of much.
Well, we've even sat down and eaten a baked bean jacket, and I mash up the potato sometimes. And even you looking at the potato that I've mashed up, and it's literally just potato that is mashed.
Which I'm going to do when I eat it.
Exactly. And yet you have this thing where you're like, I just can't do it. Because I've gone, did you want some more? And you're like, no, you've mashed it. I'm like, oh, well, more for me.
Well, even the word, even just talking about mashed potato kind of turns my stomach. So just the thought and this whole conversation is, you know, does make me feel nauseous, which is irrational. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely irrational.
But then I think it was also rational because you were force-fed it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's difficult. But there's also this issue, depending on the individual, on how long they have stopped eating for. There is something called Refeeding Syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of Refeeding Syndrome.
No, I haven't.
So Refeeding Syndrome is something where the body has gone into starvation. So if the individual hasn't eaten for a long time, your body has changed where it's getting its main energy source from. Usually we get it from carbohydrates, but in fasting, we get it from fatty tissues. And so as a result of reintroducing nutrition, the body has to then switch back to the normal way of getting energy. But as a result of that, your electrolytes are changing because your body needs those in the metabolic process. And so you need to closely monitor the individual with regular blood tests and increase nutrition gradually over a period of time. And so you have to be given oral thiamine before you start the refeeding process. Otherwise, it could cause your heart to stop. Yeah. So you start off, if they're on a tube feed, for example, you would start off with like maybe 25 mils per hour through the tube until you build up to a better level of feeding.
Yeah.
But that takes time. And you have to have regular blood tests to make sure that your electrolytes in your blood aren't fluctuating.
Yeah.
So it's pretty intense.
That does sound it.
Yeah. So that's another reason why force feeding is not the best option.
Well, that's why there's whole degrees in nutrition like you did. You know, you did a PhD in it. She's a doctor. And she, you know, whereas if you're trying to do it at home with my parents who, they didn't go to college. You know, my mum didn't even finish secondary school. So they don't have the knowledge to understand how the body works and therefore understand things like starvation mode and things like that, which I've learned a little bit about the fact that you have to introduce food slowly because of survivors of starvation during wartime. So as a history teacher,
the refeeding syndrome was originally identified.
Really?
During the war and starting to introduce food to people, they basically started to see that when people started to eat normally again, they would end up dying as a result of that.
Well, we know there was a lot of Holocaust survivors that died shortly afterwards.
Because of refeeding syndrome, probably.
And actually that they didn't
know about this at the time. So it's one of those things that we're much more aware of now. And if the individual is in hospital, then this will be taken into account. So they would see a dietitian. So I think we'll leave it there for today. The next part of this episode will be released on Wednesday. If you can't wait, then you can become a member of our Patreon page, where you can support us with a small donation of as little as $2 a month for the running of the MHBC podcast, but get access to the entire episode every Monday. All you'd need to do is go over to patreon.com/MHBC. And on Friday, we have a special author interview with Hope Virgo. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. So we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now you can find us on YouTube. So until next time, it's okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, talk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next episode will be the second half on Stand Tall Little Girl by Hope Virgo. Our next episode with the Secret Psychiatrist will be on ADHD. And our next book will be A Beginner's Guide to Being Mental, an A to Z, From Anxiety to Zero Given by Natasha Devon, MBE. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.